Deep-sea fisherwoman startled to see one prehistoric white shark trapped inside an iceberg. Sarah Thompson gripped the helm of her fishing boat tightly when she saw what made her heart nearly stop. There, floating in the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean near the coast of Maine, was an iceberg unlike anything she had seen in her 15 years as a fisherwoman. The shape was impossible to ignore. Inside the translucent ice, perfectly preserved, was the silhouette of something that looked like a gigantic shark, with teeth as sharp as razors, and black eyes staring at her through the ice. Sarah felt her hands tremble on the wheel, and it wasn't just because of the biting cold of the July morning. "Good heavens, what is that?" she murmured to herself, slowing down the engine. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she observed the frozen creature. The ice was so clear she could see every detail of the gigantic form inside, as if it were a natural museum floating in the ocean. The boat rocked gently on the waves as Sarah tried to process what she was seeing. There was something deeply unsettling about that sight, something that stirred ancient fears buried deep in her mind. The way the teeth protruded outward, the menacing curve of the body, everything seemed too real to be just ice formed by chance. Suddenly, memories came like a violent wave. 3 years ago, in these same waters, her husband David had gone out fishing and never returned home. His boat was found smashed against the rocks during an unexpected storm. Sarah had tried to go after him that day, but she arrived too late. Since then, she had been fishing alone, carrying the weight of guilt like an anchor tied to her heart. Her daughter Emily, now 16, barely spoke to her. The girl blamed her mother for her father's absence, saying that if Sarah hadn't been so stubborn about keeping the family in the fisherman's life, perhaps David would still be alive. Her daughter's words echoed in her mind every time Sarah went out to sea alone. The boat's engine was idling, and Sarah realized she needed to move. Other fishermen in the area would pass by soon, and she didn't want to explain why she was stopped staring at an iceberg. But there was something hypnotic about that frozen form that kept her from leaving. It was then that she heard the sound of another engine approaching. Sarah turned her head and saw a white boat with scientific equipment heading toward her. Her stomach tightened when she recognized the tall figure in command of the vessel. It was Daniel Thompson, her late husband's brother, and a marine biologist graduated from New England Maritime University. Daniel hadn't spoken to Sarah since David's funeral. At the time, he had made harsh comments about her being responsible for what happened to his brother. The two hadn't seen each other in 3 years, and now there he was, probably coming to investigate the same ice formation that had caught her attention. "Sarah?" Daniel's voice echoed across the water as he approached. His blue eyes, so similar to David's, studied her with a mix of surprise and tension. "What are you doing here?" "Fishing, of course," replied Sarah, trying to keep her voice steady. "And you?" Daniel pointed to the iceberg. "I got a call from other fishermen about an unusual ice formation in the area. I came to investigate for the research institute." Sarah nodded but couldn't help looking again at the terrifying shape inside the ice. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" "Never." Daniel anchored his boat near hers and picked up an underwater camera. "Can I take a closer look?" Sarah nodded in agreement, though a part of her wanted to scream for him not to approach that thing. There was something about the iceberg that made her deeply uneasy, as if she were looking at an omen of something bad to come. As Daniel prepared his equipment, Sarah watched her brother-in-law's precise movements. He had put on a little weight in recent years, and some wrinkles had formed around his eyes, but he still maintained the confident posture of someone who knew what he was doing. He had always been different from David in that regard. Where her husband was impulsive and relied on intuition, Daniel was meticulous and scientific. "Are you sure it's safe?" Sarah asked when Daniel put on the diving suit. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Why do you care?" The question hurt more than Sarah expected. "Because, despite everything, you're still family." Daniel stopped what he was doing and stared at her for a long moment. "Family." He repeated the word as if it was something bitter in his mouth. "It's interesting you say that now." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Sarah felt her face grow warm despite the cold. "Daniel, I know you blame me for what happened to David, but I don't blame you, he interrupted, completely surprising her. I blame myself. The words hung in the cold air between them. Sarah blinked several times, processing what she had just heard. What? Daniel lowered his head. I should have stopped my brother from going out that day. I saw the weather forecast. I knew there was going to be a storm, but he didn't listen to me as usual. Sarah gripped the side of the boat to keep her balance. For 3 years, she had carried the guilt alone, thinking Daniel held her responsible for David's loss. Discovering that he blamed himself too changed everything. Why did you never tell me this before? Sarah asked, her voice almost a whisper. Because it was easier to be angry with you than to deal with my own guilt, Daniel admitted. I'm sorry. The moment was interrupted by the sound of a cell phone ringing. Daniel looked at the device and answered quickly. Sarah only heard fragments of the conversation, but realized something was wrong by the increasingly tense expression on her brother-in-law's face. That was from the Institute, Daniel said after hanging up. Other people have reported sightings of strange icebergs along the coast. It seems there's an unusual cold current coming from Antarctica this year, bringing ice formations that don't usually reach this far. Sarah looked again at the shark-shaped iceberg. You mean this is normal? The ice formation, yes. But the shape... Daniel picked up the camera again. That's highly unlikely. It's as if nature had sculpted it on purpose. He dove into the icy water, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Watching her brother-in-law swim around the iceberg, she remembered how David used to talk about his younger brother. Daniel thinks too much, he would say. One day he'll forget to live because he's too busy trying to understand everything. Maybe David was right. Maybe both she and Daniel had spent the last 3 years thinking too much about guilt and responsibility instead of trying to move on. But how to move on when the pain was always there, waiting to strike at the most unexpected moments? Daniel emerged from the water, gasping and wide-eyed. Sarah, you need to see this. What? She asked, bringing her boat closer to his. It's not a shark, Daniel said, removing his diving mask. It's a natural ice sculpture, but there's something more. There are objects trapped in the ice, too. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of objects? Daniel showed her the underwater camera. On the small screen, Sarah could see blurry images of what looked like frozen metal and fabric alongside the shape of the shark. Her heart began to beat faster. Daniel, this could be... From a shipwreck, yes, he completed. Probably from years ago, maybe decades. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The last thing she needed was to be reminded of shipwrecks and accidents at sea. She already had enough nightmares about losing David. Let's go, she said, starting her boat's engine. Sarah, wait, Daniel called. I need to collect more data. This could be important for understanding the currents in the region. Important for whom? Sarah turned to face him. For your scientific reports, to impress your colleagues at the university. Daniel looked confused. To better understand the ocean, to maybe prevent future accidents. His words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Nothing you discover will bring your brother back, Daniel. I know that, he shouted back, but maybe it can save other people. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of waves hitting the boat hulls. Sarah realized they were both trembling, and it wasn't just from the cold. I'm sorry, said Daniel more quietly. I didn't mean to shout. Sarah nodded, but was already moving her boat away. I need to go. Emily is waiting at home. How is she? Asked Daniel, genuinely concerned. Sarah stopped the boat for a moment. It's hard. She blames me for everything. Thinks if I weren't a fisher, her father would still be alive. Daniel swam a little closer to her. And you? What do you think? The question caught her off guard. Sarah had spent so long carrying the guilt that she never stopped to really analyze whether it was justified or not. I don't know anymore, she admitted. I just know that every time I go out fishing, I feel like I'm tempting fate, like the sea will demand payment for what happened to David. Daniel watched her with a thoughtful expression. Sarah, I found something a few weeks ago, something you should probably know. The tone of his voice made her alert. What? Some of David's documents might be coming, things that were at our mother's house. Daniel hesitated before continuing. He has a diary. Sarah felt as if the world had stopped spinning. A diary? He wrote some things in the months before the accident. Things about you, about Emily, about his plans for the future. What plans? Sarah asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Daniel looked at the iceberg and then back at her. He was thinking about leaving fishing, Sarah. He wanted to move to the city, get a job on land. His words echoed in Sarah's mind like a gunshot. David wanted to leave fishing, but he always said he loved the sea, that he couldn't imagine a life away from the ocean. That can't be right, she murmured. It's all in his handwriting, insisted Daniel. He was worried about safety, especially after Emily was born. He wanted to make sure he would always be there for her. Sarah gripped the boat's steering wheel, feeling as if she might faint. If David really wanted to leave fishing, why did he never say anything to her? Why did he keep going out to sea every day, pretending he was happy? Why didn't he tell me? She asked, more to herself than to Daniel. Daniel hesitated. I think he didn't want to disappoint you. He knew how much fishing means to your family, how many generations of Thompsons have lived from the sea. Sarah felt hot tears running down her cold face. For 3 years, she had assumed she was honoring her husband's memory by continuing to fish. Now she was discovering that she might be doing exactly the opposite of what he wanted. I need to go, she said, forcefully starting the boat's engine. Sarah, Daniel shouted, we can talk about this. But she was already pulling away, steering the boat back toward the harbor, with tears blurring her vision. The shark-shaped iceberg was left behind, but the image was etched in her mind, along with the devastating revelation about her husband's true desires. The biting wind whipped against her face as she sailed toward the coast, but Sarah barely felt the cold. Her mind was spinning with questions and doubts she had buried for years. If David wanted a different life, did that mean she had forced him to keep fishing? Had he died doing something he secretly didn't want to do? When she reached the harbor of the small town of Rockport, Sarah tied up the boat with trembling hands. Other fishermen greeted her, but she responded only with distracted nods. Her mind was too busy for casual conversation. The house where she lived with Emily was 2 blocks from the harbor, a simple 2-story building that had belonged to the Thompson family for 3 generations. David's grandmother had built the house in the 1940s, and since then it had housed fishermen and their families. Sarah had always felt honored to be part of that tradition, but now she questioned whether she was keeping alive something that should have been left to die. Mom? Emily's voice echoed through the house as Sarah entered. Why are you back so early? Sarah found her daughter in the kitchen, studying for a math exam. The girl had her father's dark eyes, but the stubborn determination she had inherited directly from Sarah. I wasn't having much luck with the fish today, Sarah lied, not wanting to explain about the iceberg or the encounter with Daniel. Emily studied her with the perceptive gaze she had developed since losing her father. Did something happen? Sarah hesitated. She and her daughter had had so many fights over the past 3 years that it was hard to know how to approach delicate subjects without causing another outburst. I ran into your Uncle Daniel today, she said carefully. Emily's reaction was immediate. Her eyes lit up with genuine interest. Uncle Daniel? How is he? I haven't seen him in so long. He's fine, Sarah replied. He was investigating some strange ice formations in the area. Emily closed her math book. What kind of ice formations? Sarah poured herself some coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She described the shark-shaped iceberg, omitting only the part about the possible boat wreckage trapped in the ice. Emily listened with growing fascination. Wow, I'd love to see that, the girl exclaimed. It must be amazing to see something like that up close. It's terrifying, Sarah corrected. Emily looked at her curiously. Why terrifying? It's just ice. Sarah wondered how to explain to her daughter the effect the image had had on her, how to describe the feeling that she was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that seemed like a physical manifestation of her worst fears about the ocean. It just reminded me of bad things, she said finally. Emily's face immediately closed off. Bad things like Dad's accident? Sarah nodded, seeing her daughter's expression harden. It was always like this when the subject of David's death came up. Emily transformed from a curious teenager into an angry, defensive young woman. "Mom, you can't keep blaming yourself forever," Emily said, but there was impatience in her voice. "Dad died because he chose to go out fishing during a storm. It was his decision." "It wasn't quite like that," Sarah began, but Emily interrupted her. "Yes, it was. He was stubborn and didn't listen to the weather warnings. Everyone in town knew there was going to be a storm that night." Emily's words echoed the accusations Sarah made to herself every day. But hearing her daughter speak that way about her father, Sarah felt an unexpected anger rising in her chest. "Don't talk about your father like that," she said, more harshly than she intended. "Why not?" Emily rose from her chair. "Because you'd rather pretend he was perfect, that he never made mistakes." "Emily, no, Mom, you sit there tormenting yourself, fishing alone, refusing to live a normal life, all to keep alive the memory of someone who made a stupid choice." Her daughter's shout echoed through the house. Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped in the face. "He was your father," she said, trying to keep her voice controlled. "And you're my mother," Emily shot back. "But you act as if the only important thing in your life was a man who died 3 years ago." Her daughter's words hit Sarah like knife wounds. She knew Emily was suffering, that the girl needed her mother present and alive, not a woman obsessed with guilt. But she didn't know how to be different from what she was. "I'm doing the best I can," whispered Sarah. "No, you're not," Emily shouted. "You do the bare minimum to survive, but you're not really living. When was the last time you laughed? When was the last time we went out together just to have fun?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but realized she had no answer. When had been the last time she had done something just for pleasure, not out of obligation? "I have to work, Emily," she said finally. "Fishing is how we support our family." "Fishing is how you punish yourself," Emily retorted. "You stay out there on the ocean, alone, putting yourself in danger every day because you think you deserve to suffer. That's not true." "Yes, it is." Emily grabbed her school backpack. "And I can't stand watching it anymore. I'm staying at Grandma Grace's house." Sarah felt panic spreading through her chest. Grace was David's mother, a 70-year-old woman who had always made it clear that she considered Sarah responsible for her son's death. "Emily, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," the girl shouted. "At least there I won't have to pretend everything's okay when it clearly isn't." The front door slammed hard as Emily left, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen. The silence of the house became oppressive, amplifying the tumultuous thoughts in her mind. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, watching her daughter walk away down the cobblestone street toward her grandmother's house. Grace Thompson lived on the other side of town, in a house larger and better maintained than hers. The woman had been a teacher before retiring and had always made it clear that she thought her son could have chosen a better wife. The phone rang, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. She hesitated before answering, fearing it might be Daniel wanting to continue the conversation about David's journal. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Sarah, it's Grace." Her mother-in-law's voice sounded tense on the other end of the line. "Emily arrived here very upset. What happened?" Sarah closed her eyes. It was the first time in months that Grace had called her, and of course it would be to criticize her ability as a mother. "We had an argument," admitted Sarah. "About what?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to go into details about the meeting with Daniel or the revelation about David's journal. "About her father." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Grace sighed deeply. "Sarah, I need to talk to you, in person." "About what?" "About many things. Things I should have said a long time ago." Grace's voice sounded strange, almost fragile. "Can you come here?" Sarah looked around the empty house. The last thing she wanted was to face a difficult conversation with her mother-in-law, especially after the turbulent day she'd had. But Emily was there, and Sarah needed to try to fix things with her daughter. "I'll come," she said. The walk to Grace's house took 20 minutes. Sarah passed through the center of the small town, greeting neighbors she had known since childhood. Rockport was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep and tragedies became public property. Grace's house was on a quiet street, surrounded by a well-kept garden that had always impressed Sarah. The woman had a green thumb, something Sarah had never developed. David used to joke that his mother could make flowers grow even in salty soil. Grace answered the door before Sarah even knocked. The woman seemed smaller and more fragile than Sarah remembered. Her grey hair was thinner, and there was a paleness in her face that hadn't been there the last time they saw each other. "Come in," said Grace, gesturing for Sarah to enter. The house was silent. Sarah looked for signs of Emily but didn't see her. "Where's Emily?" she asked. "In the guest room, resting," Grace replied. "She was very tired when she arrived." Sarah nodded and followed her mother-in-law to the living room. The house had always intimidated Sarah a little. It was full of books, diplomas on the wall, and photographs of David at various stages of his life. It was like a shrine dedicated to the lost son. "Sit down," said Grace, pointing to the sofa. Sarah settled in, feeling uncomfortable under her mother-in-law's scrutinizing gaze. There had always been tension between them, even before David's death. Grace had never fully approved of her son marrying a fisherwoman. "Sarah, I need to apologize," Grace said suddenly. The words caught Sarah completely by surprise. "Apologize." Grace sat in the armchair across from her, her hands trembling slightly. "All these years I've blamed you for my son's death. It was unfair and cruel." Sarah blinked several times, processing what she was hearing. "Grace, no, let me finish," the older woman interrupted. "I was grieving, and it's easier to blame someone than to accept that sometimes bad things just happen." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. For 3 years she had carried not only her own guilt, but also the rejection of David's family. Hearing Grace apologize was something she had never imagined possible. "Grace, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," the woman insisted, "because there's something else you need to know. Something that might change how you see everything that happened." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. First Daniel with the revelation about the diary, now Grace with another secret. How many truths about David had she missed? "What is it?" she asked. Grace stood up and walked to a bookshelf, taking out a small wooden box. When she returned to the sofa, her hands were visibly shaking. "David came to see me the week before the accident," Grace began. "He was worried." "Worried about what?" "About money, about the family's future." Grace opened the box and took out some papers. "He had found out that I was sick." Sarah felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. "Sick?" "Cancer," Grace said simply. "It was diagnosed 2 years before his death, but I kept it a secret. I didn't want to worry anyone." "Why are you telling me this now?" Grace showed the papers to Sarah. "Because he was trying to get money to pay for my treatment. That's why he went out fishing that day, even though he knew about the storm. He had received information about a large school of fish in a more remote area." Sarah took the papers with trembling hands. They were medical cost estimates, information about cancer treatments, notes in David's handwriting about loans and financing possibilities. "He was trying to help me," Grace continued, tears streaming down her face, "and I let him go that day because I was afraid to tell the truth about my condition." Sarah felt as if the world was collapsing around her. For 3 years, she had assumed David had died due to recklessness or stubbornness. Now she discovered he had risked himself out of love for his family, trying to arrange medical care for his sick mother. "Why did you never tell me this before?" whispered Sarah. "Because I was angry," admitted Grace. "Angry at myself, at the illness, at fate. It was easier to blame you than to face my own responsibility." Sarah looked again at the papers. There were notes about different treatments, research on hospitals in Boston, desperate calculations about how much it would cost to save his mother's life. "And the treatment?" asked Sarah. "You." "I'm in remission now," said Grace. "The doctors say I have good chances of a full recovery, but it cost everything I had saved for retirement." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, needing fresh air. Through the glass, she could see the ocean in the distance, the same waters that had taken David's life while he was trying to do the right thing for his family. "There's one more thing," said Grace behind her. "About Emily." Sarah turned. "What?" "She knows about my illness. That's why she came here today, not just because of the fight with you." Grace paused. She's afraid of losing me too." Sarah felt as if she had received another blow. "How long has she known?" "A few weeks. I ended up telling her in a moment of weakness. She was visiting and I was having a hard day with the treatment side effects." "Why didn't you tell me?" Grace sighed. "Because Emily asked me not to. She didn't want to add more worry to your life." Sarah sat down heavily on the couch, feeling as if she were drowning in revelations. Her daughter was carrying the fear of losing her grandmother alone, just as Sarah had carried the guilt for her husband's death alone. Both were suffering in silence, trying to protect each other. "I need to talk to her," said Sarah. "She's sleeping now, but you can talk to her tomorrow," suggested Grace. "Sarah, there's something else I need to say." "What?" asked Sarah, not sure she could handle more revelations. "I've always admired you," said Grace, completely surprising Sarah. "Your strength, your determination, the way you kept fighting even after losing David." "I don't feel strong," admitted Sarah. "But you are. Raising a daughter alone, keeping the fishing business running, surviving the loss of the man you loved, that requires a courage few have." Sarah felt hot tears streaming down her face. It was the first time in years that someone had recognized her effort instead of criticizing her choices. "I made so many mistakes," she whispered. "We all have," said Grace gently. "But mistakes can be fixed. There's still time to make things right." Sarah wiped away the tears and looked at her mother-in-law. "How is your treatment now?" "Stable. I have checkups every 3 months, but the doctors are optimistic." Grace hesitated. "But it's expensive. Very expensive." "Why didn't you ask me for help?" "Because you already have your own struggles, and because we weren't speaking." Sarah nodded, understanding. Pride and grief had created barriers between them that seemed insurmountable, but perhaps there was still time to tear them down. "Grace, about what Daniel told me today." "Daniel? You spoke with him?" Sarah told her about the encounter at sea, about the strange iceberg and the revelation about David's journal. Grace listened silently, nodding occasionally. "He was right," said Grace when Sarah finished. "David was thinking about leaving fishing." "But it wasn't because he didn't like the sea." "Then why?" "Because he wanted to be more present for you and for Emily. He felt guilty for spending so many days away from home, especially when Emily was little." Sarah closed her eyes. Another aspect of David she had never fully understood. He didn't want to leave fishing because he disliked it, but because he loved his family so much, he was willing to sacrifice something he adored doing. "Why did he never tell me this?" "Because he knew you," said Grace with a small smile. "He knew you'd try to convince him to stay, that you'd say fishing was important for the family, that it was tradition. He wanted to make the decision alone and then present it as something already decided." Sarah remembered the conversations she'd had with David about the future, about the dreams they had for Emily. He always spoke about education, about opportunities their daughter could have. Perhaps the signs had been there, and she simply hadn't paid attention. "Did I force him to keep fishing?" asked Sarah, voicing her greatest fear. "No," said Grace firmly. "You never forced David to do anything. He made his own choices based on the love he felt for you both." Sarah felt tremendous relief, but also a deep sadness. David had died trying to care for the people he loved, and she had spent 3 years blaming herself for something beyond her control. "What do I do now?" she asked. "Live," said Grace simply. "Stop punishing yourself and start living. Emily needs a mother, not a martyr." The words echoed the accusations Emily had made earlier. Sarah realized both her daughter and mother-in-law were right. She had spent years surviving rather than living, keeping herself busy with work and guilt to avoid facing the reality of loss. "Can I stay here tonight?" asked Sarah. "I want to talk to Emily tomorrow morning." "Of course," said Grace. "You'll always be welcome in this house, Sarah. I'm sorry it took me so long to say that." That night, Sarah lay awake on Grace's living room sofa, looking at the photographs of David scattered throughout the house. There were pictures of him fishing, smiling, holding Emily as a baby. In all of them, he looked genuinely happy. Perhaps the truth was that he had been happy both while fishing and while dreaming of a different life. The two things could coexist. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and homemade bread. Grace was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The older woman looked more rested, as if confessing her secrets had lifted a weight from her shoulders. "Is Emily awake yet?" asked Sarah. "Not yet. She had a difficult night. I heard her crying in her room." Sarah felt her heart tighten. Her daughter was suffering, and she hadn't realized the extent of that suffering because she was too busy with her own pain. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you could go back in time, would you have told David about the cancer from the beginning?" Grace paused in what she was doing. "Yes, secrets cause more pain than the truth, even when the truth is hard to hear." Sarah nodded. It was a lesson she needed to learn, both regarding the past and the future. Emily appeared in the kitchen an hour later, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw Sarah, she hesitated in the doorway. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, my daughter." They looked at each other for a moment, both uncertain how to proceed. Grace discreetly withdrew from the kitchen, leaving mother and daughter alone. "Emily, I'm sorry," began Sarah. "I'm sorry I didn't realize you were suffering. I'm sorry I've been so lost in my own pain that I didn't see yours." Emily sat at the table but didn't respond immediately. "I know about Grandma Grace's illness," continued Sarah, "and I know you've been carrying this fear alone." "She asked me not to tell," murmured Emily, "and you did the right thing by respecting her wish. But now we all know, and we can face this together." Emily looked at her mother with eyes shining with tears. "Mom, I'm so scared. First I lost Dad, now I might lose Grandma too, and sometimes I'm afraid of losing you." The confession hit Sarah like lightning. "Losing me? Why?" "Because you go out to sea alone every day. Because you stay out there for hours, sometimes even at night. Because it seems like you don't care whether you come home or not." Sarah knelt beside her daughter's chair, taking her hands. "Emily, I always come home. Always. But what if one day you don't, like Dad?" Sarah realized her daughter had been living the past 3 years in constant fear of losing her mother, the same way she'd lost her father. It was a terror Sarah had never considered, because she'd been too focused on her own guilt. "My daughter, I won't leave you, I promise." "How can you promise that?" Emily asked through her tears. "Dad probably thought the same thing." It was a fair question, and Sarah didn't have an easy answer. The truth was, the ocean would always be dangerous, and accidents could happen to anyone. "You're right," admitted Sarah. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me, but I can promise I'll be more careful, that I'll take every possible precaution. And can you promise you'll stop acting like you don't care about living?" The question was direct and painful, but Sarah knew it deserved an honest answer. "Yes," she said. "I can promise that." Emily threw herself into her mother's arms, and both cried together for the first time in years. Sarah felt as if a barrier that had been built between them was finally being torn down. "Mom, there's something else," said Emily when they separated. "What is it?" "I don't want to be a fisherwoman when I grow up." Sarah felt a twinge of sadness but also pride. Her daughter had the courage to choose her own path. "What do you want to be?" "I don't know yet. Maybe something related to the ocean, but different. Maybe marine biology like Uncle Daniel." Sarah smiled. "That would be an excellent choice." "You're not angry?" "Why would I be angry? Because you want to study and have a career you love? I'd never be angry about that." Emily looked relieved. "I was afraid you'd think I was rejecting the family, the tradition." "The best tradition our family can have is raising children who are free to choose their own dreams," said Sarah. "Your father would understand that." "You think so?" "I'm sure." Grace returned to the kitchen, smiling when she saw mother and daughter reconciled. "Now that you two have worked things out, we need to talk about practical matters," she said. "What matters?" asked Sarah. "Your future, Emily's future, my medical treatment, how we're going to face all this together." Sarah nodded. It was time to stop living one day at a time and start making real plans for the future. First, about the treatment, said Sarah. How much do you need? Grace mentioned an amount that made Sarah swallow hard. It was more money than she earned in 6 months of fishing. I have some savings, said Sarah. Not much, but... Sarah, I can't take your money. You need to think about Emily's education. We're family, said Sarah firmly. We'll find a solution together. Emily looked between her mother and grandmother. What if we sold the boat? Both older women looked at her in surprise. Emily, began Sarah. Mom, you always said the boat is the most valuable thing we own. If we sell it, we can pay for Grandma's treatment and still have money left for my studies. Sarah felt as if her daughter had suggested selling her own soul. The boat had belonged to her father, her grandfather, her great-grandfather. It was more than just transportation. It was a connection to generations of Thompson fishermen. I can't sell the boat, she said automatically. Why not? Asked Emily. Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but realized she didn't have a good reason. The boat was emotionally important to her, but was it really more important than Grace's life or Emily's future? Because it's a family tradition. Mom, you just said the best tradition is raising children free to choose their own dreams. How can I do that if we're tied to a boat? Her daughter's logic was irrefutable, but Sarah still felt a visceral resistance to selling the boat. I need to think about this, she said. There's no rush, Grace interjected. I still have a few months before the next treatment. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Grace answered, and Sarah only heard one side of it. Hello? Daniel? Yes, she's here. What? Are you sure? Of course, come over. We'll be here. Grace hung up with a worried expression. It was Daniel. He's coming here. Said he discovered something important about the iceberg you saw yesterday. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. What kind of thing? He didn't want to say over the phone, but he seemed agitated. Half an hour later, Daniel arrived at Grace's house. He looked as if he hadn't slept all night, with deep bags under his eyes and wrinkled clothes. Daniel, it's good to see you, said Grace, hugging her son. You look terrible. Mom, we need to talk, said Daniel, nervously glancing at Sarah and Emily. About what I found on the iceberg. Uncle Daniel, Emily stood up to hug him. I've missed you. Mom told me about the strange iceberg you saw. Daniel hugged his niece, but Sarah could see tension in his movements. Emily, honey, could you give us a minute? I need to talk with your mom and grandma about work. Emily looked curiously between the adults, but obediently left the room. Daniel, what happened? Asked Sarah as soon as they were alone. Daniel sat down heavily in a chair. Sarah, when I dove near the iceberg yesterday, I found more than just random wreckage. What did you find? Specific wreckage. From a boat I recognized. Sarah felt as if the blood had frozen in her veins. Which boat? Daniel looked at her with pained eyes. It was David's boat, Sarah. The wreckage trapped in the iceberg was from my brother's boat. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked at Daniel, then at Grace, trying to process what she had just heard. How can you be sure? She asked hoarsely. Daniel pulled a waterproof camera from his backpack. I took photos. I managed to identify part of the boat's identification plate and some equipment I recognized. He showed the photos on the camera's small screen. Sarah leaned in to look, and her heart nearly stopped. There, frozen in the blue ice, was a part of the rudder she herself had painted 2 years before David's death. But how is this possible? She murmured. The boat was found shattered on the rocks near the coast. Apparently, not all of the boat was found, said Daniel. Some parts must have been carried by the current and eventually trapped in that iceberg that formed further south. The currents brought the ice back to our region. Sarah slowly sat down, feeling as if she were in a dream. For 3 years she had assumed she knew exactly what had happened to David. Now, discovering that part of his boat had traveled through the frozen ocean like a kind of floating tomb, changed everything. There's more, said Daniel, hesitating. What else? Asked Grace. I found something personal of his stuck in the ice, something you'll want to see. Daniel showed another photo on the camera. Sarah looked and felt tears immediately springing to her eyes. It was a small laminated photo of Sarah and Emily that David always carried in his pocket when he went out fishing. He had it with him when... Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," said Daniel gently. "Even at the end, he was thinking of you too." Sarah covered her face with her hands and cried as she hadn't since the funeral. Discovering that David had died with a photo of them in his pocket, that even in his final moments he was focused on the family he loved, was devastating and comforting at the same time. Grace stood up and hugged Sarah, her own tears flowing silently. "There's one good thing in all this," said Daniel after a while. "What?" asked Sarah through her tears. "I managed to recover the photo. It was well protected inside a waterproof envelope. I can try to extract other personal items from the ice if you want." Sarah nodded vigorously. The idea of recovering David's personal belongings, things she had given up as lost forever, filled her heart with unexpected hope. "But there's something else we need to discuss," continued Daniel. "The Iceberg is moving. The currents are carrying it toward the main shipping route. It could be dangerous for other boats." "What does that mean?" asked Grace. "It means I'll have to report the location to the maritime authorities. They'll probably want to investigate the wreckage and then break up or divert the iceberg to protect navigation." Sarah straightened up. "You mean we'll lose the chance to recover David's things?" "Not necessarily. If we act quickly, I can try to extract more objects before the authorities intervene." "How much time do we have?" asked Sarah. "Maybe a day or two. After that, the area will be restricted." Sarah stood up, feeling a determination she hadn't felt in years. "Then let's go." "Sarah," said Grace with concern, "are you sure? It could be dangerous." "Your mother is right," agreed Daniel. "The conditions at sea are rough, and working so close to the ice is risky." Sarah looked at both of them. "For 3 years, I accepted that I had lost David forever. Now we've discovered that there are still parts of him out there waiting to be recovered. How can I not try?" Daniel studied his sister-in-law's face. "If we're going to do this, we need to be extremely careful, and quick." "Can I help?" asked a voice from the door. Emily was peeking into the conversation. "Emily," said Sarah, "I thought you had left." "I did, but I came back when I saw Uncle Daniel's car," the girl admitted. "I heard you talking about Dad's boat. Is it true? Did you find parts of it?" Sarah looked at Daniel and Grace, not knowing how to explain it to her daughter. "It's true, sweetie," said Grace gently. "Your uncle found some wreckage from your father's boat." Emily entered the room completely. "And you're going to try to recover his things?" "We're considering it," said Sarah carefully. "I want to go," declared Emily. "Absolutely not," said Sarah immediately. "Why? It's about my father too." "Because it's dangerous," explained Daniel. "The work will be done in very cold waters near an unstable iceberg. It's no place for a child," Emily interrupted him. "I'm 16, Uncle Daniel, and I know the sea as well as anyone here." Sarah knew her daughter was right. Emily had grown up on fishing boats and was an excellent swimmer, but the idea of putting her in danger was unacceptable. "Emily, please." "Understand my position," pleaded Sarah. "Your position is always the same, Mom. Protecting me from everything, keeping me away from any risk. But that's not protecting me, it's smothering me." Her daughter's words echoed the accusations from the day before. Sarah realized she was doing exactly what Emily had criticized, trying to control everything to avoid any possibility of loss. "Maybe we could find a middle ground," suggested Grace. "Emily could come on the boat, but stay at a safe distance while you work near the iceberg." "Grandma," began Sarah. "Sarah," Grace interrupted her, "you just said you want to stop living in fear. That includes letting Emily participate in things that are important to the family." Daniel looked thoughtful. "Actually, it would be helpful to have another person on the boat, someone to operate the radio, monitor the weather, serve as a safety observer." Sarah found herself outnumbered by logical arguments. Everyone was right. Emily was mature enough to help, and keeping her daughter away from something so important to the family would be unfair. "All right," she said finally, "but with strict safety conditions." Emily smiled. the first genuine smile Sarah had seen on her daughter's face in weeks. "When are we going?" asked the girl. "Tomorrow morning early," said Daniel. "The sooner the better, and we'll need to bring extra gear for the cold and for working on the ice." Grace stood up. "I'll prepare some food for the trip. And Daniel, you're staying here tonight. I don't want you driving back to the city looking so tired." "Thank you, Mom," said Daniel. "Sarah, you can stay too. We'll need to leave very early." Sarah nodded. The prospect of a family night, all together preparing for the next day's mission, warmed her heart in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. That evening, the four of them sat in Grace's living room planning the expedition. Daniel drew a map of the area where the iceberg was located, explaining the currents and potential dangers. Emily asked smart questions about the necessary equipment, showing surprising knowledge about maritime navigation. "Where did you learn all this?" asked Daniel, impressed by his niece's questions. "From Mum," said Emily, smiling at Sarah. "Even when we were fighting, I always paid attention when she talked about the sea." Sarah felt a wave of pride. Even during their most difficult years, she had apparently managed to pass on valuable knowledge to her daughter. "Emily," said Grace during a pause in the conversation, "are you sure you want to do this? It could be emotionally difficult, besides being physically dangerous." The girl was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Grandma, for 3 years I lived with the version of the story that was in my head, a version where Dad was reckless and put himself in unnecessary danger. Now I'm finding out there was much more going on than I knew." She looked at Sarah. "I want to understand better who my father was. I want to connect with him in a way I never could when I was younger." Sarah felt tears forming again. Emily was expressing something she herself felt, the need for a deeper connection with David, a more complete understanding of who he had been. "And besides," continued Emily, "I want to do this with you, as a family." Daniel smiled. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll go there tomorrow as a family and we'll bring David back home, at least the parts of him we can retrieve." They spent another hour discussing logistical details. Daniel explained that he had brought special cold water diving equipment, tools for working with ice, and emergency communication devices. Sarah was impressed by her brother-in-law's level of preparation. "Do you do this kind of work often?" she asked. "Scientific diving is part of my work at the Institute," Daniel explained. "But I admit this situation is unique." "Why did you offer to help?" Sarah asked. "You could have just reported the location and let the authorities handle it." Daniel hesitated before answering. "Because I realized spending the last 3 years avoiding you two was a mistake. Because I miss my brother, and this might be the last chance to do something meaningful in his memory. And," he added, looking directly at Sarah, "because you and Emily are the family I have left. I shouldn't have let grief separate us." Sarah stood up and hugged her brother-in-law. It's never too late to start over. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Through the guest room window, she could see the sky was partly cloudy, but showed no signs of storm. Grace was already in the kitchen when Sarah came down, preparing coffee and sandwiches for the trip. "How did you sleep?" asked her mother-in-law. "Not much," Sarah admitted. "But well, and you?" "Not much either." "What? I'm nervous for you." Grace paused what she was doing. "Sarah, are you sure this is a good idea?" "No," Sarah said honestly, "but sometimes the most important things we do aren't the safest." Grace nodded. "Your husband would say the same thing." Daniel appeared in the kitchen half an hour later, already dressed in appropriate sea gear. Emily came down shortly after, with a backpack full of extra supplies she had prepared. "Everyone ready?" asked Daniel. Sarah looked around the kitchen, at the family that had reunited after years of separation. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if David were there with them, excited about the adventure they were about to embark on. "We're ready," she said. The walk to the harbour was quiet. The streets of Rockport were nearly empty so early in the morning, with just a few fishermen preparing for their own journeys. Sarah greeted some acquaintances, but didn't stop for conversations. Daniel's boat was larger and more modern than Sarah's, equipped with scientific instruments and advanced safety systems. He had loaded diving equipment, specialized tools for working with ice, and multiple layers of thermal clothing. "Impressive," said Emily, exploring the boat. "It's very different from fishing boats." "It's designed for research, not commercial fishing," Daniel explained, "but the basic principles are the same." They left the harbor as the first light of dawn painted the sky in pink and golden hues. Sarah stood beside Daniel at the helm, using her knowledge of local waters to navigate through the safest points. "Has the iceberg's location changed since yesterday?" she asked. Daniel checked his instruments. "Yes, but not much. The currents have carried it about 2 kilometers northeast, which actually works in our favor. It's in an area with less marine traffic." The journey to the location took an hour and a half. Along the way, Daniel explained to Emily the different equipment on board, from GPS navigation systems to emergency communication devices. The girl absorbed all the information with genuine interest. "You could be an excellent marine biologist," Daniel commented. "You have a scientific mind and practical knowledge of the ocean." "That's what I was thinking," said Emily, looking at Sarah. "It would be a way to stay connected to the sea, but in a different way." Sarah smiled. The idea of her daughter pursuing a career that combined her passion for the ocean with formal education excited her. "There it is," said Daniel, pointing ahead. Sarah looked in the direction he indicated and saw the iceberg floating majestically in the distance. Even knowing what to expect this time, the sight still struck her. The shark-like shape seemed even more pronounced, with the morning light filtering through the ice. "My God," murmured Emily, "it's truly impressive." "And scary," added Sarah. Daniel slowed down as they approached. "I'll anchor about 50 meters away. From there, I'll swim to the iceberg with the equipment." "Are you sure it's safe?" asked Sarah. "As safe as possible given the circumstances," replied Daniel. "I have a proper cold-water diving suit, and you two will monitor me the whole time." He anchored the boat and began putting on the diving suit. The process took several minutes, with Daniel explaining each piece of equipment to Emily. "This suit protects me from hypothermia for up to an hour in water this temperature," he said, "but I don't plan to stay in that long." Sarah watched the waves around the iceberg. They seemed rougher than the day before, possibly due to changes in the current or wind. "Daniel, the conditions seem different today," she commented. He looked in the same direction and nodded. "You're right. I'll have to be extra careful." Daniel entered the water with a safety rope tied to the boat. Sarah and Emily watched him swim toward the iceberg, his movements firm and controlled despite the icy water. "Is he okay?" asked Emily, worried. "Your uncle is an experienced diver," reassured Sarah. "He knows what he's doing." Through the waterproof radio, they heard Daniel's voice. "Approaching the iceberg. Underwater visibility is good. I can see the wreckage clearly." Sarah held Emily's hand as they waited. Watching Daniel work near the wreckage of David's boat was simultaneously hopeful and painful. "I found something," came Daniel's voice over the radio. "It looks like a toolbox. It's well preserved in the ice." "Can you retrieve it?" asked Sarah on the radio. "I'll try. It might take a few minutes." They waited tensely as Daniel worked. Sarah could see him using some kind of heated tool to melt the ice around the object. "Done," announced Daniel. "I have the toolbox. I'll return to the boat before trying to recover anything else." He swam back with the box strapped to his back. Sarah and Emily helped him onto the boat, and all three looked at the recovered object with reverence. It was a red metal toolbox that Sarah immediately recognized. David had received it from his father as a wedding gift and always took it on the boats. "Can I open it?" asked Emily, her voice trembling. Sarah nodded. With careful hands, Emily opened the box. Inside, protected by a waterproof lining, were the tools David used for emergency boat repairs. But there were also personal items, a watch that had stopped working, some coins, and wrapped in plastic, a small notepad. "These are his fishing notes," said Sarah, recognizing her husband's handwriting. "He always wrote down where he found the best schools of fish." Emily picked up the notepad and carefully flipped through the pages. Most of the notes were technical, but on the last page there was something different. "Mom, look at this," said Emily, showing her the page. Sarah read the words written in David's familiar handwriting. Emily turned 3 today. I promise I will find a way to be more present for her and for Sarah. This life at sea is too lonely. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. It was further confirmation that David had truly been considering a life change, and that his motivation was purely love for his family. There are more things I can try to recover, said Daniel, who had warmed up and was ready for another dive. Are you sure you can handle it? Asked Sarah. I can manage one more dive, said Daniel, and there's something specific I want to look for. What? His wedding ring. If it's still there, it'll probably be in the ice near the other personal items. Sarah felt her heart race. David's ring had never been found after the accident. It was something she had given up as lost forever. Daniel, you don't have to. I want to, he said firmly. For both of you. And for him. Daniel dove again, this time with more specialized tools to work on the ice. Sarah and Emily waited, watching the waves gradually grow rougher around the iceberg. The weather is changing, observed Emily, looking at the clouds gathering on the horizon. Sarah checked the boat's weather instruments. You're right, a cold front might be coming. Over the radio, they heard Daniel's tense voice. The ice is more unstable than yesterday. I can hear cracking. Daniel, come back now, Sarah shouted into the radio. Just a few more minutes. I think I found something. Sarah looked at Emily, seeing her own concern reflected in her daughter's eyes. Conditions were deteriorating quickly, and they needed to get out of there before the situation became dangerous. Daniel, Sarah shouted again. Now! Wait, I found it! Through the water, they could see Daniel emerging with something shiny in his hand. He started swimming back to the boat, but Sarah noticed his movements seemed slower than before. Is he okay? Asked Emily, worried. Sarah grabbed binoculars and focused on Daniel. He was swimming, but clearly struggling against fatigue and the cold. Emily, prepare the ladder. We'll have to help him up, instructed Sarah. When Daniel reached the boat, Sarah and Emily pulled him out of the water. He was shivering uncontrollably, but smiling and holding something in his closed hand. I got it, he said through chattering teeth. He opened his hand, revealing a gold ring that Sarah immediately recognized. David's ring, she whispered, taking the jewelry reverently. It was exactly where I thought it would be, said Daniel, as Emily wrapped him in thermal blankets. Near the photo of you two. Sarah looked at the ring in the palm of her hand. It was exactly as she remembered, with the inscription she and David had chosen together, forever united. Thank you, she said to Daniel. Thank you for doing this for us. Daniel nodded, still shivering. Now let's get out of here before the weather gets worse. Sarah started the engine and began sailing back to the coast. Behind them, the iceberg continued floating, but Sarah noticed it seemed less stable than before, with visible cracks spreading across the ice. Look, shouted Emily, pointing behind them. They turned to see the iceberg splitting in half, large chunks of ice crashing into the water with deafening roars. The frozen shark fragmented, releasing the last wreckage of David's boat into the ocean. We made it just in time, commented Daniel. Sarah watched the wreckage sinking into the dark waters. It was as if the sea was finally releasing David, allowing his family to move forward with peace. The return trip was calmer, with Daniel gradually recovering from the extreme cold. Sarah sailed confidently through the familiar waters, one hand on the helm and the other holding the recovered ring. Mum, said Emily during the trip, what are we going to do with Dad's things? Sarah considered the question. What do you think we should do? I think we should keep some things, but also pass others along, said Emily thoughtfully. Maybe to other fishermen who could use the tools. That's a beautiful idea, Daniel agreed. David would like knowing his tools are helping other people at sea. Sarah nodded. It was exactly the kind of thing David would do, help other fishermen whenever possible. And the wedding ring? Asked Emily. Sarah looked at the jewel on her hand. The ring stays with me. It's my connection to him. But not the only connection, observed Emily. You also have all the good memories, and you have me. And you have us too, added Daniel, the family he left behind. Sarah smiled through her tears. True. When they arrived at the harbor, there were other people waiting for them. The news that Daniel had found wreckage from David's boat had spread through the fishing community, and several neighbors had come to offer support. "Sarah," called Robert, an older fisherman who had known David since childhood, "is it true they found his things at sea?" Sarah nodded, showing the toolbox. "Robert, would you like to have some of these tools? David always said you were the best mechanic in the region." The older man's eyes filled with tears. "It would be an honor, Sarah. I'll take care of them as if they were my own." Other fishermen approached, and soon Sarah found herself distributing David's tools among the people who had been his friends. It was a way of keeping his memory alive in the community he had loved. "Sarah," said Daniel as they walked back home, "there's something I want to propose." "What?" "The institute where I work is looking for local guides for marine research, people who know the local waters well and can help scientists in the field." Sarah stopped walking. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting a new career. It would still be work at sea, but with a different purpose, and it would pay better than fishing." Emily looked between her mother and uncle. "Mom, it would be perfect. You could still work on the ocean, but helping protect it instead of just fishing." Sarah considered the proposal. The idea of using her knowledge of the local waters to help with scientific research was appealing. It would be a way to honor both her family tradition and the dreams of change that David had had. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course," said Daniel. "There's no hurry. But the opportunity is there if you want it." When they arrived at Grace's house, they found the older woman waiting anxiously on the porch. "Thank God you're back," she exclaimed. "How was it?" They sat in the living room and told Grace the whole experience, showing the recovered objects and describing the moment the iceberg broke apart. "It's as if the sea is returning David to you," observed Grace, "allowing you to say goodbye properly." Sarah looked at the ring she now wore on a chain around her neck. "That's exactly how I feel." "And now," asked Grace, "what comes next?" Sarah looked around the room at the people she loved who had come together again as a family. "Now we live," she said, "for real this time." In the weeks that followed, significant changes began to happen in Sarah's life. She decided to accept Daniel's proposal and started working as a guide for marine researchers. The work took her to parts of the ocean she had never explored, and she discovered an unexpected passion for marine conservation. Emily applied for the marine biology entrance exam at New England Maritime University, with plans to follow in her uncle's footsteps. Sarah sold her fishing boat to fund her daughter's education, but didn't feel the loss she had feared. Instead, she felt proud to be making an investment in Emily's future. "Don't you regret selling the boat?" Emily asked one evening as they prepared dinner together. "No," Sarah said honestly. "The boat was important, but you're more important." Grace moved to a smaller house closer to the medical institute where she received her treatment. Sarah visited regularly, and the two women developed a genuine friendship based on mutual understanding and shared support. "How's the treatment going?" Sarah asked during one of these visits. "Well," said Grace, "the doctors are optimistic, and having you back in my life has given me strength I didn't have before." Daniel became a constant presence in their lives, having dinner with them at least once a week, and including Emily in his research whenever possible. The girl excelled as a research assistant, demonstrating a natural intuition for scientific work. "She has real talent for this," Daniel told Sarah after a particularly successful expedition. "She could have a brilliant career in marine biology." Sarah smiled, watching Emily carefully catalogue the samples they had collected. "She's found her passion." One day, 6 months after the Iceberg expedition, Sarah was working with a team of international researchers when one of them asked a question that surprised her. "Sarah, have you ever thought about formalizing your education?" asked Dr. Miller, a visiting marine biologist from Iceland. "Your practical knowledge is impressive, but with some academic training you could lead your own research." The suggestion planted a seed in Sarah's mind. That evening she talked with Emily about the possibility of returning to school. "Mom, that would be amazing," exclaimed Emily. "We could study together. You could take a technical course in oceanography while I do my undergraduate degree." "I don't know if I'm too old for that," said Sarah hesitantly. "Nonsense," said Emily. "You're 42, not 82. Sarah laughed. Her daughter was right. There was plenty of time ahead for new adventures and new learning. That spring, Sarah enrolled in a technical oceanography program offered by the same university where Emily would study. Being a student again was challenging, but also energizing in a way she hadn't anticipated. "How's the experience going?" Daniel asked during a family dinner. "Difficult," admitted Sarah. "But good. I'm learning so much about the ocean I thought I knew completely." "And discovering there's much more to explore," added Emily. Sarah nodded. "Exactly." 1 year later, Sarah was on the deck of a research vessel, coordinating a study on climate change in local marine current patterns. Emily was at her side as a research assistant, and Daniel supervised the overall project. "Remember when we thought our family had broken apart forever?" Daniel commented as they watched the data being collected. "It seems a lifetime ago," replied Sarah. "Dad would be proud to see where we've ended up," said Emily. Sarah touched the ring she now wore beside her own. "I think he'd be happy to know we found a way to be happy again." As the sun set over the ocean, painting the waters in golden and pink hues, Sarah reflected on the journey that had begun with a frightening iceberg and ended with a reunited family and a future full of possibilities. The sea had taken David from them, but it had also provided the path to healing. The waters that once represented only loss and pain now symbolized discovery, learning, and renewed hope. "Sarah," said Daniel, interrupting her thoughts, "are you happy?" She looked around at the people she loved, at the work she had grown to love, at the bright future that lay ahead of them. "Yes," she said with conviction, "I am truly happy." 2 years later, Sarah was standing on a platform at the Marine Research Institute, preparing to present her first independent research. The auditorium was full of colleagues, students, and family members. "The study I'm presenting today began in a very personal way," she said into the microphone, "with the discovery of familiar wreckage preserved in the ice, but it evolved into something bigger, an investigation into how marine objects can be preserved and carried by ocean currents." In the audience, Emily smiled with pride. Now in her 3rd year of marine biology, she had co-authored the study. Grace was sitting beside her, beaming with happiness. Her cancer was in complete remission, and she had become an active advocate for medical research. Daniel was at the back of the auditorium, filming the presentation. He had been promoted to director of the oceanography department and often used Sarah's work as an example of how traditional knowledge and modern science could complement each other. "The implications of this research go beyond pure science," Sarah continued. "They show us how the ocean connects all things, preserving and carrying not just physical objects, but also memories and meanings across time and space." After the presentation, Sarah was surrounded by colleagues who congratulated her on the research, but the moment that meant the most to her was when a young local fisherman approached. "Ms. Thompson, I wanted to thank you," he said. "Your research on currents has helped us find new fish schools more sustainably. My father always said you were one of the best fishermen in the area, and now we see you're also a great scientist." Sarah was moved. The bridge between her former life as a fisherman and her new career as a researcher was finally complete. That evening, the family gathered at the house Sarah had bought near the university. It was a simple house, but larger than the old one, with room to host Grace when she visited, and an office where Sarah could work on her research. "A toast," announced Daniel, raising a glass, "to Sarah for the courage to reinvent her life, to Emily for her dedication to her studies, to my mother for her strength in overcoming illness, and to David, who taught us that true love sometimes means letting people go to find their own paths." They toasted, and Sarah felt a deep peace settling in her heart. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led to a better place than she had ever imagined possible. "There's something I want to tell you," Emily said during dinner. "What is it?" asked Sarah. "I received an offer for a summer internship at a research station in Antarctica." Sarah felt a sudden pang of fear, but quickly controlled it. "And do you want to accept it?" "Very much," said Emily, but she hesitated. "But only if you're okay with it." Sarah looked at her daughter, seeing the brave and determined woman she had become. "Emily, you don't need my permission to chase your dreams." "But I want your blessing." Sarah stood up and hugged her daughter. You have all my blessing and all my pride." After dinner, Sarah went out alone for a walk on the beach near the house. The moon was full, illuminating the waves gently breaking on the sand. She took off the chain with the 2 rings and held them in her palm. "David," she whispered to the ocean, "thank you for teaching us that true love doesn't end with death. That can turn into strength to keep living and growing." The sea breeze carried her words out to the ocean. Sarah put the rings back around her neck and returned home where her family was waiting for her. 3 years later, Sarah was at the Boston airport, saying goodbye to Emily, who was leaving for a doctoral program in marine biology in New Zealand. The separation was difficult, but Sarah knew it was necessary. "Take care of yourself," said Sarah, hugging her daughter. "You too," replied Emily, "and don't stop exploring. There's still plenty of ocean for you to study." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I'll keep exploring until my last day." "Promise?" "I promise." As she watched Emily's plane take off, Sarah felt Daniel approach. "We'll miss her," he commented. "We will," Sarah agreed, "but she's following her own path as she should." "And you, what are your plans now?" Sarah smiled. "I have a research proposal on the coast of Canada that's been interesting me. And you mentioned you needed someone to coordinate the new environmental education program. Interested?" "Very. Especially if it involves teaching young fishermen about marine conservation." Daniel smiled. "Combining tradition with innovation." David would approve. As they drove back to Rockport, Sarah looked at the ocean stretching to the horizon. Those waters had been the setting of her greatest loss, but also of her greatest transformation. The terrifying iceberg that had changed everything was just a distant memory now, but its impact kept reverberating. It had broken not only the ice, but also the barriers that separated the family and the fears that kept Sarah from living fully. "Daniel," she said, as she watched the sunset painting the sky. "Thank you." "For what?" "For helping me find David's wreckage, for giving me a new career, for being the brother he would have wanted you to be for me and for Emily." Daniel cleared his throat, moved. "Thank you for letting me be part of the family again." That night, Sarah sat at her desk preparing a proposal for a new research project. The study would investigate how local fishing traditions could inform modern marine conservation practices. As she wrote, she occasionally glanced at the framed photograph on her desk, a picture of the whole family together on Emily's graduation day. David wasn't physically in the photo, but Sarah felt his presence in Emily's radiant smile, in the determination she herself had found, in the love that continued to bind them all. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Emily calling from New Zealand. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" "Hi, my dear, I'm well. And you? How are your studies going?" "Amazing. Mom, you won't believe what we've discovered about whale migration here." Sarah listened excitedly as Emily described her research. Even separated by thousands of miles, they continued sharing their passion for the ocean and science. "And you?" asked Emily. "Any news?" Sarah told her about the research proposal in Canada and the new educational program. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," said Emily. "You've become a force of nature." "I learned from the best teacher," Sarah replied. "Life." After hanging up, Sarah returned to her research proposal. The work was challenging and required total concentration, but she felt more alive and engaged than ever. At 10 in the evening, when she finally finished writing, Sarah went out to the porch of her house. The ocean was calm, reflecting the starlight like a giant mirror. She touched the rings around her neck and smiled. Tomorrow would be another day of discoveries, another day of growth, another day of living fully, and she was ready to embrace whatever came. The iceberg that once haunted her now seemed like a blessing in disguise. It had forced painful confrontations that were necessary, revealed truths that needed to be known, and ultimately led the entire family to a better place. Sarah entered her home and prepared for bed, grateful for the past that had shaped her, for the present she was living, and for the future that stretched ahead, full of endless possibilities in the vast ocean of life. 5 years later, Sarah stood on the deck of a state-of-the-art research vessel, watching an international team of scientists prepare equipment for an exploratory dive. She had been invited as the lead consultant for the project due to her unique reputation as a researcher who combined traditional knowledge with advanced scientific methods. "Dr. Thompson," said the project coordinator, using the title Sarah had earned after completing her doctorate in oceanography at 50. "Your maps of the local currents were essential for planning this expedition." Sarah smiled upon hearing her title. She had never imagined she would one day be called a doctor, but life had proven full of surprises. "Captain Sarah," came a familiar voice. Emily was approaching, now a renowned marine biologist in her own right. She had returned to the United States the previous year to lead a new marine conservation institute. "It's so good to see you here," said Sarah, hugging her daughter. "How was the meeting with the funders?" "Excellent. We got approval to expand the project to the entire southern coast. And guess who they want as scientific director?" Sarah raised her eyebrows. "You? Both of us, as a mother-daughter partnership. They say our combination of perspectives is exactly what they need." Sarah felt tears of joy forming. Working officially with Emily was a dream she had never dared to voice. "And you want this?" asked Sarah. "More than anything. I've learned more working with you these past few years than in my entire doctorate. You're the best mentor I could ever have." At that moment, Daniel joined them. Now the director of one of the country's most respected marine research institutes, he had become a leading figure in the field. "I heard rumors about a new partnership," he said with a smile. "It's not official yet," said Sarah, "but I'm considering it." "Considering?" Emily laughed. "Mom, you know you're going to accept. You can never resist a good scientific challenge." Sarah laughed too. Her daughter knew her too well. Sarah's phone rang. It was Grace, now 80 years old, but still vibrant and active as a volunteer in environmental education programs. "Sarah, dear, are you watching the news?" asked Grace excitedly. "What news?" "About the international recognition you've received. The conservation project is being used as a model for other regions of the world." Sarah looked confused at Emily, who was smiling mysteriously. "Emily, what is your grandmother talking about?" "It was meant to be a surprise," said Emily. "But our research on integrating traditional knowledge with scientific conservation won an international award. The ceremony is next week, in San Francisco." Sarah sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "An international award?" "The Marine Conservation Leadership Award," explained Daniel. "It's one of the most prestigious in the field." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "I started as a simple fisherwoman from a small town. How did I get here?" "Through courage, hard work, and love for what you do," said Emily, "and by never giving up, even when everything seemed lost." That evening, Sarah found herself alone on the ship's deck, watching the stars reflected in the calm water. The ocean was majestic under the full moon, so different from the turbulent waters where she had encountered the haunted iceberg years ago. She took the rings from her neck and held them, as she had done so many times over the years. "David," she whispered to the sea, "look how far we've come. Our daughter is a brilliant scientist. Your mother is healthy and happy. Your brother has become true family to us. And I found a purpose I never thought possible." The sea breeze carried her words, and Sarah had the comforting feeling that somehow David knew everything and approved. "Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't end with loss," she continued, "that it can transform into strength to create something new and beautiful." A shooting star crossed the sky at that moment, and Sarah made a wish that she could continue honoring David's memory through a full and meaningful life. The next morning, Sarah woke up to a text from Emily. "Mum, I took the liberty of accepting the project on our behalf. I hope you don't mind. I'm looking forward to working together officially." Sarah laughed out loud. Her daughter had inherited not only her passion for the ocean, but also her tendency to make bold decisions. She replied, "Of course I don't mind. I can't wait to start our next adventure." And she truly couldn't wait. Life had become a series of interconnected adventures, each leading to unexpected discoveries and growth. The terrifying iceberg that had changed everything had become a metaphor for transformation. Sometimes the scariest things lead to the most beautiful destinations. End of story. Dear listeners, we now want to know what you thought of this emotional journey of Sarah and her family. Where are you tuning in from? Do you believe Sarah made the right choices throughout the story? Leave your honest opinions about this transformation of pain into hope in the comments. We look forward to reading your messages. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.